Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. You guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community, and I'm going to do a part 2 to this video. I don't normally do this, but the first video ran so long of me covering this video with Jeff Nipples and Menno that they did together that I needed to run it into 2 parts. And I went ahead and watched the second half of their video, and I decided to cover it. Yes, I'm filming these in the same day. They'll be spread out on my channel though. So let me go ahead and put on my +5 hat of Speechcraft and let's talk about this. Now, up front, I want to remind my loyal followers to be sure and click that like button down below. You got to remember there's 3 guys who run a bot on my videos every single day. So, they're giving me dislikes. You guys need to give me likes. It'd be beneficial to me. And to Jeff and Menno, because I know you guys might see this and come and chime in and don't like what I have to say, even though I actually kind of like Menno's work and his website and read it. What I've got to say to you guys, if either one of you smart mouth me, I will fuck your mom and make you my stepson. Okay? So you might want to chill with that. Now, over to the point. I watched a lot of this, and what was ironic to me is what I always have been saying lately. It feels like the bodybuilding world, even the evidence-based bodybuilding world, is so far behind the strength training world that it absolutely blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind sometimes. It's like a lot of these things that they come up with as their supposed elegant solutions, we have solved decades ago in the strength world, and it can be comical. All right, so what did they do right in the middle where I kind of left off? They jumped over and they were doing this exercise to overload the calves, and it's like, again, so superficial. First of all, calves shouldn't really be that hard to develop, assuming you have the genetics to even develop calves. They're very, very genetic. Let me just ask this question. How many strength athletes you guys see who don't have massive calves? Does it really seem to be a problem for actual strength athletes? Why do you guys think that is? Maybe because some of it's all connected together. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't focus on a weak body part, but what I would say is that you first need to master the basics. We need to master the basics first. In other words, before you decide that you have a lagging chest and need to spend an enormous amount of effort building your chest up, you might want to get your bench press up first and learn how to bench correctly, right? Because you might not really have a deficiency in your chest. You might have a deficiency in your whole upper body. And it's very frequently the same with guys who have problems with their calves. Now, I'm probably the worst person to ask on this because I'm very genetically gifted in my calves. People notice that when they do see me in shorter socks. They're like, oh gosh, wow, okay. I don't train my calves at all. My calves grow from my power training. They grow from my power training. And you go over and look at it though, and specifically what exercises do we see? Well, there's been some good EMG data that shows that actual normal back squats to parallel, seem to cause a higher EMG activation in the gastrocnemius of the calf than a lot of calf raises do, right? Makes sense. But when you look at that, that's interestingly enough. But let's think about what other exercises do power lifters and field athletes do that enormously recruit the calves. Like if your calves are actually a weakness, they'll start cramping when you do these exercises. How about the glute ham raise? Glute ham raise, the #1 hamstring builder known to man. There is nothing in the world that can compete with the glute ham raise for hamstring development, right? Other things can be supplemental to it. I mean, a Romanian deadlift is not a bad exercise by any stretch of the imagination for the hamstrings, which they already demonstrated. But how about a glute ham raise? Anyone who's ever done them correctly knows that your calves get worked tremendously on them. And incidentally, when you think about the way it ties together, how common is it to see someone, even who doesn't do calf work, who has really big hamstrings without calves to go with them? It's pretty rare. Might I suggest that maybe if your calves are small, maybe your hamstrings are small too, and you should be doing hamstring exercises, and I mean big hamstring exercises, and see if it brings your calves up? Just kind of throw it out there. And if they're still lacking after that and you have a reason to build that muscle up, by all means, put some extra effort into it. But I don't think we need to go over to some of the silly machine stuff. A lot of jumping exercises, dynamic effort exercises, glute ham raises, stuff like that can do a pretty damn good job of building your calves up. Same thing, GPP work, sled drags, pushing against prowlers, all that stuff. You're going to have jacked calves if you do all that stuff. And that's what you should be doing if you want to get strong. You should be doing all this stuff. Like a glute ham raise is not optional. Like if someone really says that they want to get strong and they want to be injury free, I think a glute ham raise is a mandatory piece of equipment to have. I think it's mandatory in the long term. I bought one myself. I have one in my living room. I bought one. So we've got that. And then he went into a lot of this other stuff talking about eccentric overloading and the importance of possible heavy eccentric overloading as he was doing these goofy shoulder exercises. And that's fine. I get it. I think they're risky because I think a lot of people are going to not have their shoulders in the correct rotation position. I think they're not going to have the external rotation that you're doing there, and they're going to mess it up because people tend to do that with lateral raises, so they might want to proceed with caution. But he pointed out the fact that you can get that heavy eccentric load on it, which can potentially build strength. We already handle that in the strength world, and I can tell you right now that is not going to be the way you want to eccentrically overload any major muscles in your body in order to get stronger. Like he actually says strength. Here's my question to someone like Menno. Have you done any dynamic work against bands or done any heavy work against bands with big exercises? Just going to throw that out there because if you have, then you would understand serious eccentric training because we already do this. The strength world has this down. Overspeed eccentrics on band work for speed work. Again, you create the most eccentric loading you're really going to get. How about the heavy eccentric when you're doing really heavy work? Have you ever deadlifted against bands? You ever deadlifting against bands? I mean, he's talking about up for the shoulders and the traps and everything up there, right? The eccentric loading. You ever done heavy deadlifts against bands? And I mean serious band tension. I'm not talking about 50 pounds of bands. I'm talking a couple 100 pounds of bands. I do 150, 200 pounds of band tension on deadlifts. The eccentric loading you get from even just doing one rep is ridiculous. You will feel it the next day. You'll feel it the next day. We can get that eccentric loading that he's talking about for strength purposes for the mechanical cleaving of the fibers. We can get that from band work. And we come back over to the point. If you're serious about strength, if you are really and truly serious about strength, at some point you probably are going to utilize these tools. We can get pretty strong off the basics. We can get pretty strong off straight barbell work, pretty strong off chin-ups and pull-ups and weighted body weight exercises and big barbell lifts. We can get pretty strong off that. But when you were really serious about getting strong, you're going to do this other stuff. I mean, if you're talking about doing any sort of heavy eccentric overloading, it's not going to be with a small little movement like that. That's not the way to do it. It really isn't. There's so many other tools that we already have available. And that's what I would suggest to some of these guys, all these bodybuilder types who are talking about this stuff. Have you guys messed with any of the powerlifting methods? Because I've met truly natural bodybuilders. I mean, Chris Lobato comes to mind. He and I talked in person at an expo before, and he had said that he saw the most hypertrophy when he was running the conjugate method using the speed work with bands. That he saw the most hypertrophy that he ever remembers getting from a cycle of training on anything in his life. And he noticed that particularly his back and traps and hamstrings and everything else just exploded. They exploded. It's just something to think about. Something to think about. And you've got all that, and the same thing. He's coming over, well, we need to do these kneeling pullovers because we don't get enough back. And this is something I argued with Menno on years ago. I don't have a problem with overhead stuff like that. I think chin-ups and pull-ups are great. You guys have seen me hit some pretty good strength standards on pull-ups and chin-ups. I think they're tremendous lat builders. They have their place. But if you're doing stuff like that, why do you really think you need these little silly pullover type exercises? It's wasteful. It's a waste of your gym time. You could be doing more effective stuff. You really could. These are silly movements. But the point that he came over to was that, oh, well, you know, rows and deadlifts. Actually, I don't know. Rows and deadlifts alone can build a massive back. And this is something Menno and I argued about on my fan page years ago. He came over and said, well, I was at this strength level. I'm like, well, you were at a weak ass strength level. You had lats proportionate to your strength, right? You had lat development proportionate to your strength, which means your probably lats were smaller than Stephanie Cohen's. You were not at any sort of respectable strength level on those, particularly the rows. I mean, his deadlift was okay. I mean, his deadlift was what he said he could deadlift at the time, you know, was what I would expect for someone with a year and a half of lifting experience. But it wasn't like a really particularly proficient deadlift, and his rows were basically at female levels. Those are not the strength I want to see on rows from grown men. I program my clients with much heavier weights than he was using on rows. And I have clients who are not advanced lifters who row a hell of a lot more than he said he was doing at that time. And they do it strict from the floor, Pendlay style. So I'm really not sure why he would expect to have big lats from rows and deadlifts with light weight. Let's come back over to the point of mechanical tension. It's the point he understands, as expressed before, that mechanical tension is a massive factor in hypertrophy. You didn't put any real mechanical tension on your lats. Therefore, your lats weren't big. It shouldn't be that hard to figure out, Menno. You might want to lift big to get big. And that was kind of the ridiculous part of this whole thing. These are a lot of these concepts that Menno expresses, Menno understands in a lot of his writings, but then when you see him actually train, I was very much not impressed. I was very much not impressed at all. And that's just my opinion on it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.